I went undercover my own diner and fired the jerk ruining it. Hey there, folks. My name's Ethan Carter, and I'm here to tell you a little story, a wild ride from my own life that nearly turned my American dream into a grease-stained nightmare. Picture this. I was a guy who took one rinky-dink roadside diner and spun it into a chain of 20 burger joints across the state. Yeah, 20. From flipping patties in a sweaty kitchen to calling the shots from a swanky office downtown, I thought I'd made it big. I'd built it all from the ground up, brick by brick, fry by fry. Problem was, I got too comfy up there in my glass tower, sipping overpriced coffee and letting other folks run the show. Big mistake. Huge. Let me walk you through how I figured that out. So, I was sitting at this massive oak desk, right? The kind that screamed, I'm a big deal. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed off a killer view of the city skyline. Steel and light stretching out like something from a Hollywood flick. I'd stacked up reports all over the place. Emails had pinged in from my regional managers nonstop. Those guys were supposed to keep my diners humming like a well-oiled machine. And on paper, man, it had all looked like sunshine and rainbows. Profits had held steady, customers had seemed happy, or so they'd said, and staff turnover had been just part of the game. That's the line they'd fed me. But I'd started picking up on some weird vibes. My buddy Dave, he's a real straight shooter, had casually dropped, Hey, Ethan, your Riverside spot's kind of gone to the dogs. Then a supplier had asked why we'd been churning through waitresses faster than a kid through a Happy Meal. And don't get me started on the Yelp reviews. Food's okay, but the service was slower than a snail on a treadmill. Manager's a jerk. Ouch! That had stung when my name was on the sign. One Tuesday morning, I'd been nursing my third cup of coffee, black, no frills, when Monica Hayes, my right-hand gal, had buzzed me on the speakerphone. Monica had been with me since I was still scrubbing grease off my jeans. She was sharp as a tack and didn't mess around. Ethan, she'd said, all business. We had another complaint from Riverside, third one that week, and I dug into the numbers. Turnover's up 30% chain-wide. I'd nearly spit out my coffee. 30%? That hadn't been part of the game. That had been a full-on staff exodus. What did the managers say? I'd asked, leaning back in my creaky leather chair. She'd snorted. Monica wasn't big on subtlety. Oh, the usual, everything's fine. Just a hiccup. No need to sweat it. No need to sweat it? I'd built this business with my own two hands, poured my soul into every burger and milkshake. If something had been off, I wasn't going to just sit there twiddling my thumbs. That's when it had hit me. I had to see it for myself. No more hiding behind spreadsheets or trusting some slick-talking manager's word. I decided going undercover, like one of those TV shows where the boss pretends to be a regular Joe. I'd told Monica to clear my week. She'd given me that look, the one where she'd silently judge me but wouldn't say it out loud, and had said, You sure about this, boss? Heck yeah, I'm sure. I'd shot back. Step 1, ditch the CEO vibe. I'd swapped my tailored suits for an old hoodie I'd dug out of the closet, one with a faded college logo and a ketchup stain I couldn't quite scrub out. I'd traded my shiny loafers for a pair of beat-up sneakers that had seen better days. I'd let my beard grow out for a couple days. Scratchy and patchy, but it'd do, and had slapped on some dollar store glasses that had made me look like a broke accountant. I'd checked the mirror and laughed. Well, shoot, I looked like I just rolled out a dive bar. Perfect. Ethan Carter, hot shotsio, had been gone. I'd turned into just Ethan, some dude craving a burger. I'd picked Riverside for my first stop. It was about an hour's drive from the city, a sleepy little suburb with strip malls and soccer moms. That diner had been one of my originals, back when I'd still poured coffee and charmed customers myself. When I'd pulled into the lot, I'd seen the sign, Carter's Diner, glowing like a beacon. The paint had been fresh. The windows had sparkled. It had looked pretty darn good, if I did say so myself. But the second I'd pushed through those double doors, something had felt funky. Not the food. Nah. The smell of fries and grilled onions had still hit me like a warm hug. It had been the vibe. The place had been buzzing. maybe half full with folks chatting over their meals. But there'd been this weird tension hanging in the air, like everyone had been waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd slid into a corner booth, tugging my hoodie up a bit, and had scoped things out. A couple nearby had been grumbling about their food taking forever. The guy had tapped his fork like he'd been auditioning for a drum solo. A mom at another table had been trying to hush her kid, who'd whined loud enough to wake a coma patient. Then I'd spotted her, Lily Thompson, though I hadn't known her name yet. She'd been hustling between tables, a tray wobbling on one arm, flashing a smile that hadn't quite reached her eyes. She'd looked beat, like she'd been running a marathon in flip-flops. "Be right with ya," she called to me, voice chipper but strained, before darting off. Later, when I'd seen her up close, I'd noticed the bags under her eyes, the way her apron had hung off her like it had been ready to give up too. And then there'd been him, Greg Sullivan, the shift manager. I hadn't needed a name tag to peg him. He'd been pacing near the counter, arms crossed like he'd been king of the castle, barking orders louder than a foghorn. "Lily, hustle up. Table 6 is starving over here." His voice had sliced through the chatter, and heads had turned, customers, staff, me included. Lily had flinched like she'd been zapped, mumbled a quick, "Yes, sir," and had kicked it into high gear. A kid in a greasy apron, cook probably, had peeked out from the kitchen, seen Greg's glare, and had ducked back like a scared turtle. Greg hadn't given a hoot who'd heard him. He'd strutted around like he'd owned the joint, not me. "Josh, you napping back there?" "Fries don't cook themselves," he'd hollered next. The cook, Josh, I'd figured, had muttered something under his breath and had vanished again. I'd ordered a coffee when Lily had swung by. "Just black, thanks," I'd said, keeping it low-key. She'd scribbled it down, flashed that tired smile, "Coming right up, hon," and had shuffled off. When she dropped it off, it had been lukewarm and had tasted like it had been sitting since breakfast, but I hadn't cared. I'd been too busy watching Greg stomp around, chewing out anyone in his path. The customers had kept eating, sure, but the mood had been tanking fast. Lily had looked like she might collapse. Josh had been hiding out back, and Greg, he'd been running this place like a boot camp. This hadn't been my diner, not the one I'd poured my heart into. Something had been seriously messed up, and I'd had a sinking feeling Riverside hadn't been the only spot. What in the Sam Hill had happened to my company? So there I was, hunched over a lukewarm cup of coffee in that Riverside booth, trying to wrap my head around the mess I'd stumbled into. The diner had gone quiet. Well, quiet except for Greg hollering like a bullhorn with legs. I just watched Lily dart between tables like a caffeinated squirrel, and Josh, the poor cook, had retreated to the kitchen like he'd rather face a grease fire than Greg's wrath. Something had been rotten in my little empire, and I'd known right then I couldn't just sip my coffee and call it a day. I'd needed answers. Lily had swung by my table again, tray empty this time, and I'd seized my chance. "Hey," I'd said, keeping my tone casual, "you holding up okay? Looks like a madhouse out here." She'd paused mid-stride and had given me a quick glance, like she wasn't sure if I was a customer or a troublemaker. Then she'd flashed that same tired smile, the one that had looked more like a reflex than a feeling. "Oh, just another day in paradise," she'd said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Up close, I'd seen how rough she'd had it. Her hands had trembled just a bit. Her apron had been smudged with ketchup and coffee stains, and those dark circles under her eyes had told a story louder than words. She looked like she hadn't slept since the Bush administration. I'd leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Seriously, though, when's your break? You're running on empty, I can tell." She'd hesitated, glancing over her shoulder like she'd expected Greg to swoop in and chew her out for breathing. "Break?" she'd said with a little laugh, dry as day-old toast. "Not sure I'd call it that. Maybe 5 minutes to scarf down a fry if I'm lucky." 5 minutes? I'd nearly choked on my coffee. I'd built this chain on the idea that my crew would be treated right. Fair hours, decent breaks. A paycheck that didn't make you cry into your ramen. What she described hadn't been right. Not by a long shot. Before I'd gotten another word out, Greg's voice had boomed across the diner again. "Lily, quit yakking and get table 10 their dang ketchup." She'd flinched, and had muttered a quick, "Sorry," Gotta go, before hustling off. I'd watched her scurry away, shoulders hunched, and that's when I'd seen it. The way Greg had loomed over her when she'd reached the counter. He'd leaned in close, too close, and had hissed something I couldn't quite catch. Whatever it had been, it had made her shrink even more. Then he'd turned, smirking like he'd just won a prize, had barked at Josh to quit slacking. The kid had poked his head out, nodded fast, and had vanished again. I clenched my mug so hard I'd half expected it to crack. This guy wasn't just a jerk. He was a walking disaster. I decided to stick around a little longer, nursing that sad excuse for coffee and keeping my eyes peeled. The diner had hummed along, customers coming and going, but the tension hadn't let up. Lily had kept moving. No breaks, no water, just pure hustle. I counted the minutes ticking by on the old clock above the counter. 1 hour turned into 2, and she'd still been at it, hauling trays, wiping tables, smiling through gritted teeth. At one point, I'd seen her lean against the wall near the kitchen door, just for a second, like she needed to catch her breath. Then Greg had spotted her. "What? You think this is a spa day?" "Move it," he'd snapped, loud enough that a lady with a toddler had looked up, frowning. Lily had straightened instantly, muttering an apology, and had plunged back into the chaos. That's when I'd heard it, a sound that had made my stomach twist. I'd been close enough to the kitchen to catch a faint noise through the swinging door, a muffled sob, quick and choked off. I'd slid out of my booth, casual as you please, and had wandered toward the counter, like I'd needed a refill. But I'd angled myself to listen. Through the crack in the door, I'd heard Lily's voice, low and shaky. "Greg, I've been going 6 hours straight. I just need 10 minutes, please." Her tone had been desperate, like she'd been begging for air. And his response? Cold as ice. "If you can't hack it, there's the door, sweetheart." Plenty of folks would kill for this gig. I'd frozen, my hand halfway in my mug. 6 hours? No break, no water, nothing? That hadn't been hustle, that had been torture. Then I'd heard another voice, Josh quieter, nervous. "Come on, man. She's been busting her tail all day. Give her a sec." Greg had laughed, a mean, guttural sound. "Oh, you're a hero now, huh? Stick to flipping burgers, kid, or you'll be out too." The kitchen had gone dead silent after that. I'd stood there, my pulse hammer in my ears, replaying every word. This wasn't some rough patch like my managers had claimed. This was a nightmare, a toxic stew of fear and burnout, simmering right under my nose. I clenched my fists under the table, feeling the heat creep up my neck. This wasn't the company I'd built. I wanted a place where folks could work hard and still go home smiling, not some sweatshop with a burger menu. I'd slid back into my booth, mind racing. Lily had come out a minute later, eyes red but dry, and had plastered that fake smile back on. She'd moved slower, though, like every step had cost her something. Josh had stayed out of sight, probably too spooked to poke his head up again. And Greg? He'd strutted around like nothing had happened, tossing orders and glares like confetti. I'd watched it all, every miserable second, and had known one thing for sure. This wasn't just Riverside's problem. If this clown was running my diner like his personal fiefdom, what had been going on at the other 19 spots? I'd taken a long, slow sip of that awful coffee, letting the bitterness settle. I'd come here for answers, and boy, had I found them. But I'd also found something else, a fire in my gut I hadn't felt in years. This mess, it had been on me to fix. What kind of mess had I let fester in my own house? By the time I'd polished off that sorry excuse for a coffee, the Riverside diner had started feeling like a pressure cooker with a busted lid. I'd been parked in my corner booth, replaying Lily's shaky plea for a break in Greg's icy shutdown, like a bad movie on loop. Josh's half-hearted stand-up routine hadn't helped either. It had just made the whole scene sadder. My fingers had tapped a restless beat on the chipped Formica table, and I'd felt my patience wearing thinner than a dollar store napkin. I'd come here to scope things out, sure, but watching my crew get steamrolled while I played wallflower? Nope. That wasn't how Ethan Carter rolled. Not back in the day and not now. I caught Greg mid-strut, swaggering past my booth like he'd been the star of some low-budget cowboy flick. Lily had been across the room, dragging a rag over a table like it had been her last mission on Earth, and Josh had still been hiding out in the kitchen, probably praying for a trapdoor. Timing couldn't have been better. I'd stood up, brushed some imaginary crumbs off my ketchup-stained hoodie, and had piped up, loud enough to carry but cool as a cucumber. "Hey, big guy, got a minute? Looks like you're running a circus here." Greg had spun around so fast I'd half expected him to trip over his own ego. His scowl had been epic. Think Grumpy Cat after a bath. "What's your deal, pal?" he barked, sizing me up like I'd been some schlub who'd wandered in off the highway. I'd flashed him a grin, leaning into the good old boy vibe. "No deal. Just saying, your waitress over there's about to faceplant into a tray of fries. Maybe give her a timeout." I'd nodded toward Lily, who'd frozen mid-swipe, clutching that rag like it had been her lifeline. Greg had let out a snort that had sounded like a hog with a head cold. "She's fine, mister. Little hiccup earlier. Nothing big. We're swamped. No time for babying folks." His voice had dripped with that special blend of sarcasm and disdain, like I just asked him to knit me a sweater. I'd tilted my head, stepping closer with my hands shoved in my pockets. "Swamped, huh? Funny, 'cause she'd been hauling tail since I got here, and you just strut around like a peacock on parade. She needs a breather, man." He barked out a laugh then, short, sharp, and meaner than a snake in a boot. He'd leaned in, close enough I'd smelled the stale coffee on his breath. "Listen up, buddy. I don't know who you think you're talking to, but we don't coddle slackers round here. She's good, or she can take a hike." That had lit the fuse. I'd felt my ears get hot, but I'd kept that grin nailed on, nice and easy. Slackers? That's rich. She's out there working circles around you while you play King of the Hill. Step up or step off, pal. The diner had gone quieter than a library during finals week. Forks had hovered. A kid's straw had stopped mid-slurp, and Lily had peeked over, eyes wide like she'd just seen a unicorn stroll in. Greg's face had gone from tomato red to a shade that had matched the diner's cherry pie filling. "You got some guts, mister," he growled, jabbing a sausage-stick finger at my chest. "Think you can do my job? Go flip some burgers yourself. Or sit down and mind your own dang business." I'd heard a tiny squeak. Lily, probably. And then Josh had popped his head out of the kitchen, apron looking like a Jackson Pollock painting of Greece. He cleared his throat, sounding like a mouse facing a lion. Greg, she hasn't had a sip of water or a break all day. Just, FYI, Greg had spun on him like a buzzsaw. "Nobody asked you, kid. Get back to your fry station before I send you packing." That had been my breaking point. I'd square my shoulders, keeping my tone smooth as butter. Nah, he's got a point. She's taking a break. Right now. Make it happen. Greg had blinked at me like I'd just spoken Martian. "Who in the Sam Hill are you to give me orders?" he'd spat, his voice cracking just a hair. The whole place had been watching now. Customers leaning in, the toddler's mom clutching her kid's sippy cup like it had been a grenade. I'd let his question hang there, soaking up the tension like a sponge. Then I'd reach into my beat-up wallet, slow, deliberate, like I'd been pulling the winning card in a poker game, and had slid out my ID, the one that read Ethan Carter, CEO in bold letters, with my company logo winking right beside it. You'd have thought I'd dropped a live possum on the counter. The diner had gone so quiet I'd heard the ice machine humming in the back. I'd held up the card, giving Greg a front row seat to his own personal nightmare. "I'm the fellow who signs your checks." I'd said, calm as a Sunday morning. "And I'm saying she gets a break. Pronto." Greg's jaw had hit the floor faster than a sack of potatoes off a truck. Lily had dropped a rag, hands flying in her face like she'd been in a soap opera freeze frame. Josh had peeked out again, eyes popping like he'd just won the lottery or lost his lunch. A guy in a trucker hat by the window had whipped out his phone, muttering, "Holy smokes, this is going on TikTok," while his buddy had nodded like a bobblehead. Greg had sputtered, his tough guy mask melting into a puddle of panic. I didn't hear you. The Ethan Carter?" he'd choked out, sounding like a kid who'd just broken his mom's favorite vase. I'd nodded, slipping the ID back like it had been no big deal. "Yep, in the flesh. And you're done treating my people like dirt. Let's take this to the office, Greg. Move it." I turned to Lily, who'd still been gawking like I'd sprouted wings. Hey, Han, grab some water, take 15. You've earned it, and then some. She'd bobbed her head, still dazed, and had shuffled toward the kitchen like she'd been sleepwalking. Josh had mouthed a silent dude before ducking back to his grill, probably scared he'd get dragged into the drama. The diner had buzzed to life as I'd headed for the back, Greg stumbling after me like a scolded hound dog. Customers had craned their necks, whispering up a storm. That's the owner? Did he fire him yet? The toddler's mom had leaned over to her kid, muttering, See, honey, that's why you don't mess with the big boss. I caught a lady snapping a sneaky pic with her phone, probably dreaming of her 5 minutes of internet fame. I'd ignored it all, marching straight for that cramped little office, a glorified closet with a desk, a flickering light, and a stack of greasy timesheets. Greg had trailed behind, sweating bullets, and I'd known this was just the start. I'd walked in there with one goal, clean house, starting with him. The staff? They'd been in for a wild ride, and I'd been ready to steer the ship. How'd they handle it when I dropped the hammer? The door to that cramped little office had barely clicked shut behind us when I turned to face Greg, my blood still simmering from the circus I'd just witnessed. That flickering bulb overhead had buzzed like a ticked-off hornet, casting shadows on the stack of timesheets and a half-empty soda sweating on the desk. Greg had stood there, hands shoved in his pockets, looking like a guy who just realized the roller coaster he'd hopped on wasn't stopping. I'd taken a deep breath, letting the stale air of that closet-sized room settle my nerves, and had leveled my gaze at him. This wasn't going to be pretty, but it had been long overdue. All right, Greg, I'd started, keeping my voice steady but firm. Let's cut the baloney. What's your excuse for running my diner like a boot camp? He'd shifted his weight, eyes darting to the floor like it had held the answers. Look, Mr. Carter, I didn't mean no harm, he'd stammered, his tough guy growl replaced with a whine. It's just busy, you know? Gotta keep folks moving, or we fall behind. I'd raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. Busy? Sure. But turning my crew into zombies ain't keeping things moving. It's grinding them into the dirt. 6 hours without a break? Yelling at them in front of customers? That's your playbook. He'd open his mouth, then shut it, like a fish gasping on the dock. I was just trying to keep order, he'd mumbled, barely audible over the hum of that dang light. I'd leaned against the desk, the edge digging into my hip, and had let out a dry laugh. Order? Buddy, you turned this place into a pressure cooker with no vent. Lily's out there dead on her feet. Josh is scared to breathe, and the customers are snapping pics for their worst service ever posts. That's not order. That's a train wreck. Greg had swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like a buoy in a storm. I didn't know you'd see it like that, he'd said, desperation creeping in. I can do better, I swear. Just give me a shot. A shot? I'd almost laughed again, but the peso had dropped. This guy hadn't just messed up. He'd poisoned the vibe I'd spent years building. No second chances for that. Nah, I'd said, straightening up. You're done, Greg. You've been treating my people like punching bags, and I don't roll that way. Pack your stuff. You're out. His face had gone slack, like I'd yanked the plug on his whole world. You can't just fire me like that, he'd sputtered, a last spark of defiance flickering. I'd stepped closer, voice dropping low. Oh, I can, and I did. This is my diner, my name on the sign. You're lucky I'm not tossing you out the front door myself. Now scoot. He'd stared at me, mouth flapping, then had grabbed his jacket off the chair, muttering something I couldn't catch. I'd watched him storm out, the door banging behind him, and had felt the weight lift just a little. One mess down, plenty more to mop up. I'd stepped back into the dining area, the buzz hitting me like a wave. Greg had stomped past the counter, head down, while customers had whispered and pointed like he'd been the main act at a county fair. Lily had been by the soda fountain, clutching a glass of water like it had been a lifeline, and Josh had peeked out from the kitchen, apron still a grease masterpiece. The toddler's mom had given me a thumbs up from her booth, like I'd just won the good guy award. I'd waved it off, heading straight for Lily and Josh. Y'all all right? I'd asked, pulling up a stool by the counter. Lily had nodded, still a little shell-shocked. Yeah, just, wow. You really can him? she'd said, her voice soft but steadying. Josh had piped up, wiping his hands on a rag. Dude, that was epic. He's been a jerk since day one. I chuckled, scratching at my scruffy beard. Epic, huh? Well, he's yesterday's news now. But I need to know, what's it going to take to make this place work for you guys? Lily had blinked, like she hadn't expected the question. More hands, maybe? We're stretched thinner than a pancake on a griddle. Josh had nodded fast. Yeah, and breaks, like real ones, not just chug a soda and get back to it breaks. I jotted that down in my head, picturing the clipboard I'd left in my truck. Done and done, I'd said. More staff, real breaks. Anything else? Lily had hesitated, then added, maybe not getting yelled at all shift? That'd be nice. Josh had snorted. Yeah, no kidding. I've been dodging Greg's tantrums like they're dodgeballs. Tantrums are off the menu. I promised, leaning back. Look, I built this chain so folks could clock in, do good work, and still have a life. Not whatever this mess turned into. I'd paused, glancing between them. Josh, you got a good head. How'd you like to step up as assistant manager? Help keep things smooth? His jaw had dropped, the rag slipping for his hands. Me? For real? He'd squeaked. Heck yeah, yes, sir. I'd grinned. Good. And Lily, you're getting a raise, plus a bonus for holding this place together. You're tougher than a $2 steak. She blushed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Thanks, Mr. Carter. That means a lot. I'd stood up, brushing off my jeans. Call me Ethan. We're family here, not some corporate gig. Now, take the rest of the day to breathe. I've got calls to make. They nodded, still a bit starry-eyed, and I'd headed for the door, feeling the diner's pulse shift, just a tick, but it had been there. Customers had gone back to their fries, the whispers dying down, and I'd known this was step one. Firing Greg had been the easy part. Rebuilding the soul of this place? That'd take some elbow grease. I climbed into my truck, already dialing Monica to get the ball rolling on new hires, and I'd wonder how fast we could turn this ship around. Would they step up when the rail work kicked in? Those next few weeks after Greg's exit had zipped by quicker than a NASCAR pit stop. I'd been holed up in my truck that day, yakking away with Monica through the Bluetooth, like I'd been calling the shots at the Super Bowl. Kicking Greg to the curb had been like pulling a splinter out of my foot. Stung like crazy but felt good after. Still, I'd known one loudmouth's exit wouldn't magically fix Riverside. I'd needed a real game changer. Someone who could turn that diner around without turning my crew into a pack of nervous wrecks. Monica, bless her heart, had delivered big time. She tracked down Tracy Morgan. No, not the funny guy from TV, though I had paid to see him sling burgers, but no-nonsense pro who'd wrangled greasy spoons from here to Oklahoma. Word was, she'd been tough as nails but fair as a county judge, the type who'd chew you out with a smile and still buy you a Coke after. I thought, sign me up. I'd met Tracy a couple days later at this little coffee joint downtown. Think chipped mugs, sticky tables, and a barista who'd looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She'd rolled in with her rusty pickup, ponytail swinging like she'd owned the place, and had gripped my hand like she'd been sealing a cattle deal. So, Riverside your problem child, huh? She'd said, slurping an iced latte through a straw that had seen better days. I'd grinned, swirling my black coffee. Real stuff, not that diner swill that had tasted like burnt socks. Yep, it's a fixer-upper, all right. Good folks, bad juju. You up for the challenge? She'd kicked back in her chair, arms crossed, and had smirked. I've tamed worse than that. Give me a week. I'm running smoother than a grease pig at a fair. I'd liked her spunk right off the bat, handed her the keys, and had prayed she'd whip that place into shape before I'd lost any more Yelp stars. Tracy hadn't messed around. I'd swung by Riverside a few times that first week, rocking my trusty hoodie and keeping my head down, not to play detective, just to eyeball the progress. She'd hit the ground like a tornado with a to-do list. First move? 2 new hires to take the heat off. Sam, a bouncy college kid with a grin wider than a Texas highway, had jumped on waiting tables, and Mike, a wiry fellow with a buzz cut and a knack for the grill, had teamed up with Josh in the kitchen. Lily had perked up fast with some extra hands, darting around with a smile that had actually reached her eyes, not just some plastered-on mask. Josh had taken to his assistant manager gig like a duck to water, strutting around with that badge pinned to his apron, keeping the fryers humming without breaking into a flop sweat. Tracy had been the glue, checking tickets, tossing one-liners, even hopping in to clear a table when Sam got buried under a lunch rush. No barking orders, no stomping around, just pure, steady hustle. I'd seen her once, propped against the counter, yakking with an old-timer about his fishing trip, while she topped off his sweet tea with a flourish. That's when I thought, hot dang, she's the real deal. The whole joint had started buzzing different. I'd noticed in the details. Lily belting out a little Dolly Parton tune while she'd scrubbed the soda machine, Josh high-fiving Mike over a perfect burger flip, customers lingering over their shakes instead of hightailing it out. Tracy had set the tone. Fair shifts, legit breaks, like actual sit-down-any-sandwich breaks, and a rule that nobody got an earful unless they royally goofed. I'd overheard her one day, leaning into Josh with a grin. You scorch a patty, you remake it. No sweat, kid. Just don't turn my grill into a campfire. He'd laugh like she'd handed him a winning lotto ticket. I'd parked myself in my usual booth, sipping a Coke that had actually been cold for once, and it felt a warm fuzziness I hadn't in ages. Pride without the usual side of heartburn. 3 weeks later, I'd figured it was time to see if this makeover had stuck. I'd ditched the undercover look. No more scruffy beard or cheapo glasses, just rolled and wearing a crisp button-up and my least worn-out jeans, strolling through that door like any Joe off the street. The bell had jingled, and I'd walked into a scene straight out of my wildest dreams. Friday lunch rush had hit full swing. Counter packed with truckers scarfing down fries, booths stuffed with families and gray-haired regulars swapping stories over coffee. The air had been thick with the smell of sizzling onions and fresh-baked buns, not that old cloud of stress and stale vibes. Sam had zoomed past, balancing a tray like a circus pro, and had hollered, "Hey, good to see ya." Tracy had been at the register, punching in an order with one hand and pouring sweet tea with the other. "Double cheese, hold the onions. You're set, darlin'," she called a guy in a John Deere cap, tossing a wink for good measure. It had been like watching a well-oiled machine, smooth, loud, and full of life. I'd snagged a booth, and Lily had bounced over, notepad ready, her ponytail swinging like she'd had a triple shot espresso. Well, if it ain't the big man himself," she teased, eyes sparkling. "No hoodie today, Ethan? Going fancy on us." I chuckled, tipping an imaginary Stetson. Caught me red-handed. "How's this gig treating you now?" She'd leaned in, propping a hand on her hip. "Like $1,000,000. Tracy's a rock star. Keeps us sane, keeps the food flying. Best job I've ever had, hands down." I nodded, feeling that fuzziness bloom into a full-on glow. "Glad to hear it, kid. Give me a burger and fries. Stat, I'm hungrier than a bear in spring." She'd scribbled it down, giggling. "Coming right up, boss. I mean, Ethan." The grub had landed fast, hot, juicy, with fries crisp enough to sing about. I chowed down, eyes roaming the room. Josh had been at the kitchen pass, flipping patties like he'd been born with a spatula in hand, tossing a nailed at Mike. Over the sizzle. Customers had been laughing, clinking mugs, a couple of old-timers even tipping their hats to Tracy as she'd refilled their coffees with a grin. I'd heard bits of chatter. "This place is back, baby." Finally, somewhere I dragged the whole family to. When Lily had swung by to check on me, I'd wiped my greasy fingers and had said, "You guys crushed it. This is the diner I pictured way back when." She beamed, resting her tray like a pro. "Thanks, Ethan. Feels like home now. Worth sticking around for." I'd polished off my plate, slapped a fat tip on the table. 'Cause heck, they'd earned it. And had stepped outside, the afternoon sun warm in my face as I glanced back at that Carter's Diner sign, glowing proud. I'd known then I'd dodged a bullet bigger than Texas. Tracy had been the spark. The crew had risen to the occasion, and the customers had sealed the deal with their wallets and their chatter. I'd hopped into my truck, cranked up some Johnny Cash on the radio, and had made a vow. No more letting this baby drift. No more turning a blind eye. This little burger empire of mine, It'd stay mine through and through, and I'd keep it humming like the good old days. What did it feel like to finally taste victory with a side of fries?